still to this day, the most coherent moment I had in my life was this 90-minute meditation sit we were doing in this beautiful pagoda on the edge of Yosemite. And I just was so tuned into my body for what felt like an eternity, but was somewhere around 90 minutes. And after leaving the pagoda from that specific meditation sit, I walked out and I looked up at the sky. And as soon as I walked outside,
Welcome back to another episode of After the Peaks. Today's guest is Jeddy Azuma. Jeddy is the founder of the Rising Man movement, an initiative deeply focused on men's leadership and empowerment. With over a decade of experience in guiding men through their personal and collective journeys of growth, Jeddy has established himself as a profound leader and mentor in this field. His work extends to hosting the Rising Man podcast, where he engages with a diverse range of leaders to explore modern masculinity and its challenges. Jeddy's commitment to initiating men into their power and purpose has made a significant impact, inspiring a generation to lead with integrity and authenticity. Jeddy, welcome to the show.
oh, thank you, man. You almost hypnotized me for a moment there. No joke, man. I was kind of getting a little bit emotional hearing somebody speak that way about me, because I'm pretty sure that that's not a bio that I've given you. So I think that must have been generated by you, man. I appreciate that intro.
Absolutely. And thanks again for being here. I always love to open up the episodes with a quote. And for this particular conversation, the theme which I want to talk about, and I think you have a good handle on, is vision. Create a vision of who you want to be, and then live into that picture as if it were already true. Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Arnie. Love that.
So for you, how does a strong vision impact the process of goal setting and the journey towards achieving these goals?
Well, I'm a firm believer that every single one of us has the capacity to hold a vision for something that's bigger than just ourselves. And that until I've identified what peak that is that I want to climb, because we all have different peaks that we decide to climb in our lives, that it's my mission to identify which one of the many peaks do I want to endeavor upon. And I know for myself, I had many beliefs about what having a vision and a purpose was when I didn't have one. And I thought it was that I would identify something specific, and then I could just focus on working on that thing for the next 25 to 30 years and then call it a day. Where what I've come to appreciate is that vision is actually very fluid. I think of it like navigating with the stars. I can find my way home by following the North Star, but it's not always a straight line in how I might get there. And that's how my journey's been. And having a strong vision and also a strong why for why I want to climb that mountain is what has been able to wake me up every day for the past 8 years to fight for this thing I care about so much.
I love that. Can you take us back to 2011 when you were 25 and you were not happy? You were getting involved with substances. Life was not going the way you wanted. You were numbing out. I feel that the start of your journey, a lot of us can relate to, as far as you didn't have that vision at that time. So can you kind of walk me through that process right before you left for the West Coast?
Absolutely. Well, going back in time, at the age of 25, I was living in New York City. I had recently, in the past couple of years, completed my doctoral education as a physical therapist. I was employed as a physical therapist, making more money than I needed as a 25-year-old living in the city as a bachelor. And I was able to do everything that I wanted to do. But the problem was that it all felt really, really empty. And what I didn't know at the time is that I was moving out of a stage of development typical to men called knighthood and into the next stage of development called princehood, based on a woman named Alison Armstrong and her work. And knighthood is essentially adolescence, the time in life where men are out in the world, seeking fun, adventure, experiences, gathering all of those wonderful moments and stories that help shape what we build with our lives. Whereas princehood is more about settling in and focusing my energy and my attention on creating and building something. And that in between space was really painful for me, as it is, I think, for many, not just men, many people, many young people at that stage where you're asking yourself, well, what do I care enough about to devote all of my time, attention, energy, and resources towards? And if we haven't gathered enough life experience to decide with conviction which direction to move in, then we kind of freeze. And a lot of times that's when substances and sex and all these other things we use to distract ourselves, they enter our lives to pass the time. And I know that's what it was for me. I was medicating myself with marijuana and tobacco and other recreational drugs at times just to avoid looking into the unknown. I didn't have a mentor to guide me through that. I didn't have elder men to help me find my way. I certainly didn't have any rites of passages or initiatory practices to help me claim passing into a new chapter and stage in my life. And so it was a very painful time back in 2011. And thankfully in 2012, something woke up in me that said, you got to get out of here. Despite all of the boxes being checked here in New York, you got to go. And I did. And it started me off on this incredible journey that has led me to where I am now, going on 12 years later.
One thing you spoke about was a silent retreat that you did for 10 days. And for the audience, it's called Vipassana. Mm-hmm. And you sat for 10 days and meditated for 10 hours a day. Mm-hmm. And you said on the fourth day of this Vipassana, you got very, very clear. Mm. And there was a vision at this Vipassana. Can you share that?
Yeah, man. First of all, thanks for doing your research on me. You're helping me relive my story with ease. So yes, this was back in 2012. It was 1 month into my journey throughout the Southwest and Western United States. And I had a number of people in my community who had done Vipassana meditations, retreats, and I hadn't done one myself. And so I wanted to. It felt like a good time to go inward. And the specific experience you're speaking about, for anyone who's not familiar with Vipassana, it's a style of meditation that's about getting very present and becoming emotionally neutral to whatever physical or emotional experiences you're having, just to observe and witness. And somehow going into the fourth day of, I think it was more like 14 hours of meditation a day. It was a lot. And I remember still to this day, the most coherent moment I had in my life was this 90-minute meditation sit we were doing in this beautiful pagoda on the edge of Yosemite. And I just was so tuned into my body for what felt like an eternity, but was somewhere around 90 minutes. And after leaving the pagoda from that specific meditation sit, I walked out and I looked up at the sky. And as soon as I walked outside, it started to just rain, like just a gentle rain. And some combination of just the presence and awareness of myself that I had and the connection that I felt to my environment and just life itself was something maybe I'd never experienced in my life. Certainly hadn't experienced in many, many, many years. And I just started to cry. I remember it's a silent retreat. And here I am bawling my eyes out inexplicably. And I can't tell anybody why. And they don't really care anyway. But here I am bawling my eyes out. And every time I closed my eyes to wipe away the tears, I had this flash of fire. And it almost jarred me because I'd never experienced something like a bona fide vision. I was literally having visuals. And every time I closed my eyes, I would see the same fire. And so eventually I just sat there with my eyes closed, and I saw this fire, and it wasn't one of those big raging fires. It was a little bit of a more modest, contained fire. And because it was so dim, I could just barely see the faces of people sitting around the fire with me. And I would look to my left and I would look to my right, and there was just a circle of people. And eventually I noticed that they were all the faces of men that were sitting in circle. And at this point in my life, I'd already been a part of men's organizations since I was 17. So like 7-8 years, I'd already been sitting in circles with men, but more informally, not a lot of elder guidance on that, just kind of doing what instinctually felt right. So I'd never really had this experience like what I was seeing in my, I guess you could say my mind or behind my eyelids. And it just really affected me because I didn't know what to make of it. And this was on day 4 of a silent retreat. So I had to sit with that for 6 more days before being able to process it fully. But I recognize now that that was very much the beginning of this vision for this vocation that I've had in creating healing spaces for men. And well, I'm sure we'll say more about that, but that's recapping that experience that you were asking about there.
Yeah, and I love that. And just to tell the audience, that's number 1 of the Rising Man podcast in March 2018.
Yeah.
So, flash forward, here we are, 6 years, 7 years later. And how has your vision kind of like changed over the last 6 or 7 years? Has it shifted? Is it more powerful than it was before?
Well, if we're talking about from that moment at Vipassana, there was still another 2.5 months of journeying on the road with a backpack with no specific destination in mind, just following my footsteps and my intuition that led me to a much more clear path forward. Because until after Vipassana, I still hadn't met the men who would become the men on my men's team. I still hadn't encountered the Rites of Passage community in Southern California that I participated in and the mentors I learned from there. And I also hadn't met my wife. That was like a month and a half after Vipassana. So it was, I didn't, unbeknownst to me, so much of my destiny was right around the corner at a time where I felt like, where's my life going? So pretty soon after that, I had those experiences and encounters that then informed me that, oh, wow, there's a lot for me to look at within myself as a man. And truly the next 2 years was really all about me going deeply into the work myself, both on a men's team and within the Rites of Passage community. I went out and did a 4-day solo fast for the first time in July of 2014, 3 weeks before I married my wife. And so that was really the closing of a chapter and the beginning of a new one in my life that looked like becoming a husband and a father. And then that whole experience greatly informed how I wanted to work more closely with men. So once I got all of those pieces together, it was pretty clear that I was going to spend the next season of my life blending these medicines together so that men could have access to the healing that they require to find their purpose, to become the leaders that the communities and families require, that they need. And so I'd say the biggest part that's evolved about my vision is it's less about the what, right? If I'm going back to that idea of a North Star, the North Star hasn't moved since I first saw it. That first glimpse of fire behind my eyelids, that hasn't changed at all. The means by which I get there has changed. And so I always use the metaphor of climbing a mountain, and you probably heard me say it before, Brian, that the mountaintop is the vision. The peak is the vision. Getting to the top, I don't know what it's going to look like, but the vision in my mind of standing at the top of that mountain and looking at that 360 view is what compels me to march forward and to climb it. But you don't climb a mountain by staring at the top. You have to look down so you don't trip on something or walk off of a cliff. So there's that dynamic relationship between looking at the big picture vision and checking in with the top, make sure I'm still heading towards that North Star, and then looking back down at my feet. And the path and trajectory towards how I get to that peak has taken lots of twists and turns that I didn't expect. I never for a moment thought that I was going to start a podcast, let alone a whole business and organization for men. I just wanted to help men heal in the way that I did. I didn't think that I needed to do, I didn't even know that anybody could just start a business until like a week before I started one. I didn't know any of this stuff. So, in short, to answer your question, it absolutely has evolved, but it's more about the means by which I get there than the big picture what.
Mm. One of the core principles of the Rising Man movement is discipline.
Mm-hmm.
And it also shows up as one of the 14 principles of the Rising Man, in that he is disciplined with his actions and emotions.
Mm-hmm.
What are the psychological effects of thinking you don't have control over your life choices? And how do these influence one's vision for the future?
Well, I think the way you asked that question, I think it's a conversation of power and capability. I don't believe I can climb a mountain fully until I do it. So there has to be some element of faith and belief that I can do something in order for me to embark on something that's really challenging. So I think that power is really what that comes down to. If I don't have that belief in myself that I can be that type of person or that I'm capable of doing it, then I'll shrink. If I believe that life is happening to me and I don't have influence over my choices or circumstances, then it gives me a very convenient excuse. It gives me an easy out not to take action or take matters into my own hands. So on the surface, obviously, it's very disempowering, but it's also actually more comfortable. Maybe it doesn't feel good. I'm not saying that feeling disempowered or feeling like a victim to one's circumstances feels good, but it's a lot less scary than saying, you know what, I'm not the victim. I'm actually part of the problem. But being part of the problem means that I'm also part of the solution. So I think that's the risk of saying that my life is out of my control. Because granted, there is a lot that's out of my control. There's so much that's out of my control. I can't control my circumstances. I can't control what other people do. I can't control what happens to the world at large. Trying to do that can be a very fruitless and frustrating pursuit. But I am in control of myself. I can be disciplined with my thoughts. Maybe not my initial thoughts, but the moment I have awareness of a thought, I can direct my attention where I want it to go. I can choose when and where I wake up and how I use my energy throughout the day. And so I think, I think that that's something a lot of people struggle with. I know I've struggled with myself. I still do many, many times over. It's not like life gets easier. The levels just get more complicated. And it feels the same.
Yeah, I feel the word agency comes to mind, and just not having agency over your life. And there's so many things that are vying for our attention. And when you were growing up, there wasn't Instagram, there wasn't Facebook, there wasn't all these social media influencers. Like, you open up an app now and it's like targeted to you, and that itch that you need to scratch, right? Not having luck with women, not in the best shape, anything that you're struggling with is like being offered to you on a silver platter. So just having agency, I think, is so important, but sometimes it's hard to do that alone if you don't have a community of men to support you, to witness you, to shine the mirror on you. And I've been in Rising Man for 4 years, and I've went through your containers of Inferno, of Compass, of Dojo, and there's so many different layers to Rising Man. And it's funny because I remember when I did Compass, I was like, all right, guys, see you later. I'm good. Like I got my message. I got, but it's like 4 months later, I'm like freaking out. And, I jumped into a fire circle, and that fire circle I've been with for almost 4 years now. And these guys are my brothers. We've been together multiple in-person trips, and it's just like, I never thought that the relationship would go that deep with people I met on the internet.
Yeah. Well, just to jump in there for a second, Brian, it's a testament to you and to the other men on your men's team in your fire circle, because it's not a guarantee that the relationships will become that deep. That's one thing that the hardest part about my job, man, is that I have to paint a picture for people until they decide that they want to experience it for themselves. And how do you tell people what having strong, reliable male relationships in your life is going to feel like in a way that gets somebody to say, yeah, yep, I get it? Because you don't get it until you have that. You can't. Just like an experience like Compass. How could I possibly tell you what that experience would be like? It would come even close to what it actually was for you, you know? So there's an element of faith and trust. And honestly, I mean, I put it back on you and the other men who decided that it was worth it to learn about each other, spend enough time together to care enough about each other. You guys have traveled long distances to be together. You guys have taken time off of work, time away from your families to prioritize those relationships. And that's the only way that you get the outcome that you just shared. So I tip my cap to you, man, and maybe even a good opportunity for you to say, why did you make that decision? You know, what helped you to recognize that that was so valuable that it was worth your time, energy, and effort?
Well, it's the standard that others hold, right? They're
Mm,
not going to let you fall. And if you are going to fall, they're going to pick you back up. And a lot of what I appreciate about this space is that sometimes you are left at the edge of a cliff and no one's going to tell you what to do. They're not going to, tell you something polarizing that, oh, I did it this way. You need to do it this way. No, it's like you need to figure it out on your own. And if that means going to the gym and lifting weight to freaking, you know, think to yourself, like, why are they telling me I'm not emotional? Why are they telling me I'm playing small? Well, it's like until you actually embody playing bigger, until you actually embody doing the things that scare you, you're always going to be like not fully present of who you're actually wanting to become, right? And
mm,
if it's like
mm,
you're doing that as a lone wolf, well, who's going to hold you accountable besides you? And then you
yeah.
go to your phone and you like go to that course, go to that webinar, go to that, in-person meetup. And it's like you spend this money and it's like, this was one of your Monday morning meditations. I think it was 283 about incorporation, right? Like you're not going to get true change from a one-off experience.
Mm.
So to do the deep work is to do the deep work. There's no way around it.
Yeah. Yeah, man. That's something that I love to say. You know, a lot of people, and I did it myself too, man. So, and I have a podcast. It's funny because I often tell people stop listening to the podcast because it's easy to get seduced into intellectualizing life and trying to figure everything out from our heads. I mean, it's really dangerous nowadays with all the podcasts. When I started a podcast, there was 10 podcasts for men, and half of them were about how to get laid. Now it's like you're not anybody unless you have your own podcast, which is really cool because it's great and there's a lot of people with a lot of great wisdom out there. But if we're always just consuming wisdom through our ears and we're not actually walking those steps in our lives, then it doesn't become fully integrated wisdom. It's just conceptual. And conceptual wisdom is, you can't really rely on that. You know, would you trust? Here's a good example. Okay. You're an adventurous man, right? I'm sure you look like the kind of guy who's probably jumped out of a plane before. Am I right?
No, but I've climbed
No?
mountains.
Okay. Okay, you climb mountains. Okay, well, let's stick with the jumping out of a plane reference because I think it's
All right.
more edgy. Um, if I was going to jump out of a plane and I went to a place to do this, and the person who was going to guide me in jumping out of a plane for the first time said, "Hey, listen, I've never actually done this, but I've listened to a lot of episodes of a podcast of how to do this, and I've watched a lot of videos. So let's go do this. I know a lot about it. I just never done it before." Right? It's like, come on, would you really put your life in someone's hands who didn't have that kind of experience? And I don't think that that's any different for any of the other stuff that we do. You know, it cannot become actually integrated, applicable wisdom unless we've lived it and walked those steps ourselves. And that's the edgy part, right? The edgiest part is actually doing the work and walking the steps and climbing the mountains, right? You can't just watch videos of people climbing mountains all day and get the same experience.
Yeah, one thing I think about is, these spiritual retreats for ayahuasca, and people go to these places and feel like they're going to get transformed with doing none of the inner work and just bypassing the process and having a psychotic break. Like they're just having a spiritual crisis. There is no spiritual awakening because there's nothing underneath to like really take a deep dive about like, why am I feeling this way? Oh no, I need to go do ayahuasca in Costa Rica.
Mm.
And it's like people don't take the time to really get around community and like-minded people and just kind of like unpack things the long way. They need a quick fix, and that's not sustainable.
Well, that's a symptom of our culture. It's a more Western colonial mindset of things, of thinking that the world is here in service to me instead of me being in service to the world, and that also I deserve to have things, and I deserve to have them faster. Right? That sense of entitlement that has become such an icky part of our culture, and we're all part of it. We're all contributing to it in different degrees. So I'm not externalizing my judgment. I recognize that we're both participating in this system. But when you actually talk about more indigenous wisdom, from my understanding, I've been involved in Native American ceremony since I was 23, and I'm still just learning so much. But when it comes to indigenous wisdom, it is always rooted in service and in humility, and making it less about myself, less about me and what I can get out of this. And it's a very different mindset and perspective to come from, where this more modern mindset that we've gotten into, where we want things to happen fast. I want the magic bullet that's going to solve all of my problems. When you take that mindset and you combine it with these traditional ceremonies and ways, it doesn't add up. Whereas, the more traditional way, the more ceremonial way, there's taking what you learn in a ceremony and applying it to your life. In Rising Man, one of the terms that we use all the time is incorporation. Very similar to integration, but when you break down incorporation, it means in corpus, to bring into the body, to take that experience and to walk those footsteps in my life outside of the overnight ceremony or outside of the medicine experience. Because if I'm not weaving it back into my everyday life, then it might as well have been a dream. And it's very difficult for people because it's just part of this fast food culture that we have, where we want to jump from one thing to the next, looking for the quick fix, the quick hit, something to take it away faster. And man, if there's one thing I've learned in my life, this metaphor of climbing mountains is so valuable. Anything worth having is something that requires many steps to get there. So there's no overnight success. There's no instant gratification or immediate resolution to big problems. It requires endurance and tenacity.
Yeah, I kind of feel like when you go do the medicine, it's something that was already in you to do. It's just waking you up to go apply it when you could have just did it, back at home and just, deepen your relationships and have, more clear vision and purpose and discipline, and just get quiet, the modalities of meditation and journaling and all that stuff. But what I want to shift into is the actual rite of passage. What is the significance of a rite of passage in the context of modern masculinity, and how does it contribute to the development of a man's identity?
Ooh, that's a really well phrased question. Well, essentially, a rite of passage is a ceremonial death and rebirth. Oftentimes, I use the metaphor of chapters in a book. So I think all of us in our lives, if we've lived long enough, we can look back and say that there were different chapters, different seasons of our lives. And often there aren't intentional and deliberate ceremonies or events that are orchestrated to identify the passage from one chapter of life or one stage of life into another. And there are many different ceremonial rites of passages. In fact, you can find evidence of them from whatever line of descent you come from, wherever your blood comes from in the world, there are traditional ceremonies that men and women used for millennia to ceremonially mark these passages from one stage of life to another. And the significance of it in terms of masculinity in modern men is that point your finger on the timeline of the moment that you became a man and tell me, how would you know? How would you know that you became a man? Especially for boys becoming men, there's some biological indicators of, hair growing in places and voices deepening and biochemical things happening within us that affect our attention and our behaviors. But the moment that I actually become a man, it's not like snapping your fingers and overnight I go from boy to man. So these ceremonies are very useful in helping an individual declare that passage for themselves and to accept the responsibility of moving from one season of life into another. And my understanding in more traditional contexts is it was a community decision. Oftentimes it was the aunties and uncles who would identify when a boy was ready to accept the responsibilities of manhood. And those peoples had their own ways for testing, essentially, initiating a boy into manhood. And I mean, some of these practices were pretty challenging. There was the survival of some of these rites of passage was not guaranteed. And the belief of some of these peoples was, well, if the boy survives this trial of sorts, then he'll prove his worthiness and his reliability as a man, as a protector and steward of our people in their way. So when you think about that in a modern context, I think there are so many boys and young men who just have no idea what their life is for or where it's heading for a multitude of factors. But just looking at it broad strokes, I think there are a lot of boys who aren't raised with the type of mentorship and guidance and direction that young men require to identify their path in life. Whether that's having a certain degree of experiences or a variety of mentors and essentially being able to drink from the cups of enough elders to decide for myself what I want and to be able to choose that powerfully. So, as you know, so much of our work is reintroducing practices like this, making them available in a modern context for modern boys and men so that we can reintroduce this natural cycle of helping boys pass from boyhood to manhood. I mean, there's so much more I could say about that, but I think that at least starts to answer your question. I'll send it back to you.
How does the Rising Man's compass vision fast specifically facilitate a man's journey of self-discovery and transformation? Because that's updated for modern times, the compass.
Yeah. Well, it's a very deliberate process, without going too deeply into the finer points of it. There's 3 stages. And this is how I was taught by my mentor, Ken Pierce, is that there's the first stage is severance. So if we're thinking about that metaphor of a book, severance is like I'm writing the last couple of paragraphs in this chapter of my life. It's about completion. It's about shedding. It's about letting go of this identity that I've held onto and created up until now. Moving into the second stage, which for us is where you go out alone for 4 days and 4 nights without food into the wilderness. Those 4 days is considered threshold. And that's the time where you're in between seasons. The page is suspended right in the middle. You're not on the old chapter and you're not yet on the new chapter. You're right square in the middle. And this is where you get to kind of unincorporate yourself for a moment, right? Kind of like melt down into nothing and see what's really there. And then after that threshold time, you come back and you return back to the community. And that's when incorporation begins. And that's when you've flipped to a new chapter and it's all blank pages. And now you're writing the first few sentences of this new season and chapter of your life. So that's what it looks like for us. And there's, as I said, there's a lot more. Some of it we keep to mystery and some of it's just not worth getting into the details right now. But the basics of marking that moment in your life where you're saying that I'm letting this part of my identity die so that a new version of me can be reborn. And I'm willing to sacrifice food and sleep and comfort for 4 days and 4 nights so that I can source that information and insight I need for who I want to be. and the story I want to write in this next chapter. So that's really what it's about. For people who have no context for spiritual practices or ceremony, just think of it as creating the context for clarity. Because sometimes going out into the middle of nowhere without food for 4 days, without contact with anyone or anything else, essentially free of all distractions, is sometimes exactly what we require to hear what our inner voice has been telling us all along. So that's how we do it. And like I said before, there's many ways in which to do that.
Yeah, I love it. It's been a huge impact for me. And to let the audience know, I've done the Compass Vision Fast with the Rising Man in 2021. So it's coming up on almost 3 years. And it's you versus you, but then it's also you with you, right? For 4 days. And, to come out of that experience, to kind of go off into the sunset, it seems like a great ending, but that's just the beginning of like your journey and questions and deepening your relationship to yourself, your community, and just, asking those big questions. And that's why I jumped right back into a fire circle, because those are my brothers, and they can really, be the mirror for you if you're really looking to level up in your life. And I think it's really hard to do it alone. And you've been in this space for a long time. What are the most significant changes you have observed in men who participate in Rising Man programs, whether it's Inferno or Dojo, particularly in terms of their personal growth and self-awareness?
That's a little bit of a harder question to answer, because the experiences that you're referring to, each one of them has a different focus and intention and purpose. I'd say if we're talking about Compass, going out for Vision Fast, everyone comes back with something a little bit different, but everyone comes back with greater clarity of who I am, what my purpose is, what I want to create with my life. That's, I would say, the unifying factor and variable. If I'm just thinking more generally about what men get from our experiences, I'd say one of the first things is an experience of being ununique. I know that's not really proper English, but of not being unique, of recognizing, wow, I'm not the only one who has these problems, who has these insecurities, who has these fears, these doubts, these icky parts of myself that I don't let the world see very often. That's one of the first things. And we really emphasize that, especially early on with men first coming into our community. The best thing we can do for each other is acknowledge that, hey, what you're going through, I get it. And we can hold it, because we've all been there before, or we're going through it right now. You're not unique. So just an experience of acceptance, really being accepted for all of our perceived flaws and insecurities that we have, and being loved in spite of that, but then also being challenged not to just settle in to a life of mediocrity and complacency. Because I think that's where some men's work and men's organizations fall short, is leaning too heavily on acceptance and almost bordering on bypassing, where we make it too okay for men to play small in their lives, right? Or indulge in whatever types of behaviors that they have. I always think there's a good balance to have between acknowledging that, hey, this is part of who you are, and how you've come to navigate and survive your life. And is it good enough? Are you satisfied with that? Should we be satisfied with this behavior from you? And if the answer is no, then, well, what are you going to do about it? Where do you want to take that? Where do you want to go next? So I'd say also a degree of challenge, healthy challenge, right? We're not here shaming and berating men for not being better versions of themselves, but we're also not letting men accept that this is as good as it can get.
Yeah, it makes me think of myself, and the macadamia nut is the hardest nut to crack. Like 300 pounds of pressure to crack a macadamia nut.
Is that right?
Or a pistachio, which is like I could just, crack these all day in my mouth. So it's like I came into the space with like 30 years of conditioning.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the older men that come into this space, like they have this conditioning and they're harder to crack or harder to get to. And like the struggle of not knowing, like, why is someone telling me I'm not being emotional when you haven't dealt with your emotions for, 20 plus years? And then just kind of unpacking that and really taking a deep dive and like just accepting the fact that, you're being seen, witnessed by other people, and they just want you to level up. So you can't go to these places to rest, I think, all the time, because that's when it's like, we're just buddies, right? I have to go into this space to grow. And I think that's why what makes our team so dynamic is that we're constantly asking ourselves like how we can grow. And it's like, if someone falls off, we're always kind of rising with the tide to ask questions, make things more interesting, and healthy challenge, I think, is one of them. And I deal with it in the space right now.
Yeah, man. And again, right alongside that healthy challenge is also being extremely supported and encouraged. Because we want men to win in their lives. We say that when a man's winning in his life, that we all get to celebrate and claim that as a win for us too. It's the best feeling in the world. I love when guys send me messages and give me updates on places that they're winning and say, "Man, if it wasn't for Rising Man, ... Which, this is not what we're doing is not revolutionary, or maybe it is revolutionary, but it's not revelatory. It's not something that hasn't been created in the past. This is very simple mechanics of brotherhood. We operate best when we're working together and functioning together. So there's also a remembering of how to do this, a return to a genuine brotherhood that frankly is it takes a lot more effort, and it's a little more complicated than even I thought it was because of all of our programming and conditioning, but we're certainly capable of it. I've experienced it myself, and I've witnessed it in men like you and other men who have been in Rising Man for many years. It takes that time. And when people are willing to invest that time, energy, man, the returns are incredible.
A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Lao Tzu. That's on the Rising Man website. And that's kind of how I look at this experience, and that, you got to get the reps in, you got to be consistent, and it's a daily practice of just prioritizing and just having a vision. And your vision is constantly being messed with every single day. So it's like, I know, and what you talk about is vision, is purpose, and just, staying on your vision. And it's like, sometimes people don't know what their vision is because they're so not like claiming who they are. And it's like, they almost don't know who they are.
Yeah, it's true. And I think that's a cause for a lot of the disharmony we have in society these days. I know one of the things that you mentioned to me before we started, you were kind of describing the mission and the vision for this podcast and what you're doing. There's different measures of success in the world. And I believe that the way that many people have been led to measure success is not actually congruent with what people desire for themselves. I mean, we don't have to go down the rabbit hole of talking about capitalism and consumerism, but all you have to do is just look around at nature, and the natural world doesn't participate in a society of capitalism and consumerism. There's a hierarchy, and there is a survival of the fittest mentality that is real. But this idea of gathering and accumulating resources and somehow that leading to happiness and ultimate safety and security, I believe that so much of that is actually a myth. And I believe firmly that the true wealth in life lies in relationships and shared experiences. And the people I know who are the happiest are the ones who have the best relationships and the most amazing experiences with those people they care about the most. And having a life of relationships and experiences like that doesn't take $1 million. It doesn't take several $1,000,000. It doesn't take 5 sports cars and a robust portfolio of stock investments. I mean, and I'm not saying any of that stuff is bad. But if that is the focus, and relationships and experiences and shared time and a collective mission with other people is not part of that recipe, then I believe that there will be something missing for that person. I'm only 36 years old. I don't know. I can't say definitively, and I'm always willing to change my mind. Maybe a year from now, I'll sing a little bit of a different tune. But so far, I've found that to be true in my life and in the people who I've observed around me.
I want to shift gears here to boundaries. What are the long-term consequences of not setting boundaries on an individual's sense of self and personal well-being within their relationships?
Well, I consider boundaries to be letting people know where and where I will not concede. Anyway, where am I willing to let you in, and where must I assert some distance between you and myself? Sometimes it's physical distance, right? Like saying, hey, you stay over there, right? You stay over there because that's the comfortable distance I feel from you. If it's somebody who's trying to exert physical harm on me. And oftentimes when we're talking about boundaries, it's more energetic or emotional. And the importance of it for me is number one, having the confidence to declare those boundaries. Because if I don't, then essentially it's like leaving my front door open, and letting anybody walk into my house. Even if it's somebody that I know, sometimes it doesn't feel good to have certain people in my house, and then, they walk into my house and they start rifling through my pantry and, putting on my clothes, and all of a sudden it's easy to feel very violated and very taken advantage of, etc. So obviously that's just a metaphor, but energetically speaking, if I feel like somebody is taking my sovereignty away from me, or more accurately, I'm giving it away, then it's going to leave me feeling less powerful, feeling less capable. It makes me feel small. It makes me feel, going back to what you said before, it makes me feel like a victim, like I'm powerless to the circumstances and conditions around me. And that's just not a place to create a beautiful life from. So I think that's the importance of boundaries. I think it also lets people know where I'm available to connect and where I'm not. So it also helps build safety and trust with other people. Boundaries is not only used to keep people out. Sometimes boundaries let people know where they can find their way in. And so I think it has a lot of functions, but ultimately it helps to build trust in relationships, which is, to me, the most valuable currency on the planet.
Yeah, I love that. And I feel once the boundaries are not established, it's like you become permeable. And it's like when you want to reestablish and reclaim who you are, everyone sees you showing up as this other person for so long. So it's hard. That's why change is hard. And you got to kind of step outside the box. But it's communities like Rising Man that can actually kind of take you under the fold to kind of maybe get you away from the bad friendships, get you away from the bad relationships, point the mirror to you to kind of tell you, hey, this is not the one for you, or hey, like this is not the right friend group for you. There's a quote by Brene Brown: when we fail to set boundaries and hold people accountable, we feel used and mistreated. This is why we sometimes attack who they are, which is far more hurtful than addressing a behavior or a choice.
Yeah, man, it's a beautiful quote. I love Brene Brown and her work. She was one of the people I studied very early on in my, probably before Rising Man, or as Rising Man was becoming what it is. I think I've studied a lot about the human nervous system, and in my work, not just with men, but just interacting with humans and understanding that there's a survival instinct that each of us has. Every living creature on the planet has a survival instinct that will prioritize me and my survival over anything else, including my relationships that extend out of me into other people. So it's, especially as the beings that we are, we like to claim that we are more conscious and more woke than all life on the planet, which is debatable. But having the capacity for complex relationships, it's our responsibility to manage ourselves so that we can be in more honest and open relationship with each other. And if I don't feel safe, then those animal instincts, none of us are above our animal instincts. If you push somebody far enough, into their discomfort and into their fear and out of their safety, they will bite back. And I don't just mean figuratively, I mean literally. You push somebody, they talk about mama bears, they talk about tiger mamas. You push humans far enough and they will become the most basic savage version of themselves to protect. So obviously, I don't think any of us really want to live in a society like that where we have to deal with that every day. So it becomes our responsibility to use these other tools we have. We have very robust and intricate language that can communicate a lot of things. We have emotions, the ability to emote and express how we're feeling visually on our face with our facial expressions, in our tone of voice, in our volume. There's so many different ways we can communicate with each other. And I think it's each of our responsibility to do that effectively so that we don't have to go to our base instincts, so that we don't have to, become scrappy animals rolling around on the ground with each other. But none of us are above that. And I think that's a really important thing to remember is we have these expectations of being civilized when somewhere inside of each of us is a killer, cold-blooded killer. If your life depended on it, you would gouge out somebody's eyes, punch them in the groin, fish hook their mouth. Like, if it really came to it, every one of us would do that. And acting like we wouldn't, that's just being ignorant.
Yeah, you made me think of Trevor Boehm talks about be dangerous, but not a danger, right? And you need to get that uncivilized part of you out.
Totally, man. I mean, so much of the work I've done with men over the years has been getting men to accept that we have anger because it's been so unsafe for us to express it because it's scary. Like seeing a man in his full, raw, like primal power, like full on Spartan warrior, gorilla man beating his chest. That's scary for most people. Even men. There's a lot of men who are scared of that and intimidated by it. I know I was when the first couple of times I saw men go deep into that primal part of themselves, I was like, whoa, where's the door? It triggered that survival instinct in me. Like, I got to get out of here because I'm the smallest guy in the room. And then you realize we all have that part in ourselves. And that it doesn't have to be an aggressive or violent or dangerous part, but it's real. And, they say that the most dangerous person in the room is somebody who doesn't know how to handle a weapon, right? We're always afraid of people carrying around guns, but the most dangerous person is somebody who's never held one before, right? So that's usually the metaphor I think of when it comes to these big emotions like anger, but also grief. Grief and sadness is another big emotion that, especially men, we don't really know how to hold and wield that well. So there's an emotional education and intelligence that is also part of our responsibility to make it a safer place for ourselves and everybody else.
Love that. What are the initial steps for someone interested in joining the Rising Man movement, and how can they start their journey in men's work?
You talk to me. I'm the guy. No, but seriously, I'm glad you asked that question because we've become much more deliberate in how we bring men into our community over the years. Admittedly, in the early days, I just wanted guys to get in and become a participant. And because of what we've learned, we recognize, well, there's a much better way that we can prepare men to be a part of this community. So some of the things that we have at the first stage, we have an event called Rising Man Weekend now, where men come out. It's a 3-day immersive experience where basically we teach you to leave your mask at the door and let us see who you are. And let us all revisit and remember what it means to become brothers. And so that's an incredible experience that we just started doing this past year that I'm looking forward to bringing more men out to, because that really gives you a sense of, hey, this is what the Rising Man way is. This is what we're about here. And this is how you can become a member of this community if you decide to. For the guys who are not able to make it out with us in person, we have a program called Ignite, which is an online program that is interactive with myself and other leaders in the community. And it's really about learning the foundations of who you are as a man. So what's your vision? Even if you don't have the fullness of what that mountain peak is for you, what's your vision? What do you want to create in your life? What are some of the things that you value? What are your personal core values, your code that you live by? Helping men to identify those pieces. And then we put you on a team with an experienced leader, and we teach you guys how to be on a team together, how to hold each other accountable, use some of these tools that we practice inside of the Fire Circle community. And then eventually, going through these steps, you can join and become part of a fully fledged Fire Circle team like you are, Brian. So you got in the early days, the wild, wild west, where you got kind of grandfathered into that. We're more deliberate about it these days. But anybody who wants to get started on that journey, truly, if you want to, shoot us a message. You can email us, you can message us on Instagram. I'm sure we'll share that information later. But that's really the best way to get started, is by asking, hey, where can I sign up?
I love it. Thanks for being on the show, Jeddy. And I can't wait to be around the fire in 3D soon.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much, man. And congratulations on this journey. It's been so great to see you as a man unfold in the 4 years that I've known you. So more power, more blessings to you. It's an honor to be on this show with you, and keep going.
Thanks, Jeddy. Take care.
You got it.